welcome to Fruity Knitting. I'm Madeline.
And I'm Andrea.
And this is episode 162. Fruity Knitting is your gateway to knitting inspiration from around the world, as well as extra snippets of travel, history, and storytelling that we hope adds joy to your life and brings a smile to your face.
And we have a brilliant interview for you this episode with the fabulously talented Zanete. She's the designer of the stunning sweater that Madeline is wearing. And we actually recorded this interview during our UK trip last summer. So Zanete is a Latvian designer with a huge Instagram following, so many of you will already know her. What I love about our interview is that you're going to see another side of her. So we talk not only about her favourite construction techniques and design ideas, which of course is very interesting from a knitting perspective, but we talk also about how her background as an IT programmer and project manager sort of shapes or influences the way she does her design business now. For example, Zanete treats her pattern releases like software projects going through all the stages. So there's research and design and implementation and testing, and then finally the great big launch. And she explains that in a really sort of fun, entertaining way. And I think if I was a designer, I would find this interview very interesting because it's a real insight into her design business. So Zanete calls herself more of an architect, and she's always inventing new techniques or clever twists on existing ones. And she's exactly the kind of designer to follow if you love improving your skills and learning something new with each new project. So over the last couple of years, Zanete's been teaching more workshops, and we're really fortunate to have her lead the workshops for one of our Austrian Alps knitting retreats this year in June. And that retreat sold out fairly quickly. So we're really thrilled that she's agreed to lead workshops of another retreat for us later this year, and that's going to be in October. So we'll share the details of that retreat towards the end of this episode in case you're interested in joining. But what we're particularly excited about is that for each of those retreats, Zanete is going to design a sweater in our yarns. This is super exciting. I can't wait to see what colours she uses and puts together and what it looks like.
Yes, and of course Mum and I have our own knitting updates to share with you. Mum started a brand new beautiful project, and I'm almost finished with the sweater that I've been knitting for my husband Ryan. Since Ryan and I got married last year, Mum and I have gained some new German and American family members, and the American family members are mostly from Minnesota. They invited us to spend Christmas with them last year, and so that's what we did, and we had a really wonderful time. And despite it being really cold outside, we still managed to do some fun Minnesotan outdoors activities, which we took some video of, and I'll share that with you later on. But for now, I think we should get started with Ryan's sweater. I'm sure many of you will recognize it. This is the infamous boyfriend, fiancé, husband sweater. And the title tells you just how long I've been working on this project. So as a reminder, this pattern is actually called the Varde Rundfelt sweater, and it's designed by Rauma Designs. It also uses their Rauma Fernöl yarn, which I really like. And the original sweater is actually knitted bottom up. However, I began with the yoke, using a provisional cast on, and then I knit the body and the sleeves top down. And this simply gave me more control over the yoke depth. At first, I used bright blue as the main colour, and although I really love this bright blue, combined with the other colours, it did look slightly hideous, so I replaced it with a more elegant navy, and to do this, I cut the yoke, reworked the bottom half, and then grafted everything back together. And after that, I worked very hard to knit the body, but because Ryan wasn't around at the time, I ended up making the body too tight. And instead of blocking it first and seeing if that would make it fit better, I was really overly motivated and chose to rip the entire body and sleeves back to the yoke and start again. And in hindsight, I think this was really dumb. I should have simply blocked it, and it probably would have fit him fine. So by this point, I felt pretty frustrated, which is why I took a break from the sweater for a few months. And then shortly before Christmas, I set myself the goal of finishing the sweater before the new year. Now, obviously I didn't quite manage that, but I did do a lot of knitting I did the body, one sleeve, and have almost finished the second sleeve. And I did also learn from some of my past mistakes. For example, previously the body was too tight on Ryan. So this time I went up a needle size when I started the body. And so I went from 3mm to 3.25mm. And also before dividing for the sleeves and body, I added just a few extra stitches to the yoke.
Hold it like this so they can see the pattern.
Yeah. However, every time I learn from a previous mistake, it seems like I have to make a new one. And this time I made the body too short, which you've probably noticed already because it does look a little bit disproportionate.
It's a crop top.
It's a men's crop top. So I think one of the reasons for this is that women's sweaters do tend to be slightly cropped. So this would go over the belt line for me. But I think on men, sweaters just look better if they're slightly longer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that was the first reason. And the second reason, honestly, I think I've just been knitting on this for so long. I was really impatient and just wanted it to be finished. But that was a mistake. So I noticed my mistake when I was about here in the ribbing. And I haven't been enjoying knitting ribbing much lately. And this is a very wide sweater, so it takes extra long. And I made a controversial decision to just keep going, bind off, do my sleeves first, and then I thought I would rather graft than rip back. So that's what I'm going to do, probably. Mum's trying to talk me out of it.
But I am trying to talk you out of it. I think you'll do the ribbing in no time flat. You just got to get your mind around it. This is a thing that we've all learnt. It's better as soon as you're doubting whether the project's actually going to fit, stop and rip. Don't keep going pretending that somehow magically it's going to work itself out.
Yeah, but it's more fun to cut things open and graft them back together again. And binding off is also really time consuming. So I might just go ahead and graft. So what I would do is I'd cut open fairly shortly before the ribbing begins, the body, and then add some extra rows and then graft it back together again. And I can time myself and we'll just see what's faster.
Anyway, I think it's looking good.
Yeah, so it's not quite bring and brag, but I promise I will have it ready for the next episode. And so that's my husband's sweater by now. And like I said, Ryan and I got married last year. Ryan is half German, half American. So Mum and I have gained both German and American family members. A lot of them were able to come over to Germany for the wedding, but I really wanted to get to know them better, which is kind of tricky if you live so far apart. So we decided to fly to Minnesota for Christmas and spend time with them.
And the mother-in-law came along as well.
Yeah, and that was really fun.
It was good. I really enjoyed getting to know the family.
Yeah. This was my first time in the US, and most of it was spent out in the countryside, which we all love. In Minnesota, the temperature dropped to around 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 18 degrees Celsius, and that is roughly 20 degrees Celsius colder than winter in Frankfurt, so not something we're used to. This particular scene was filmed during a blizzard, and it was so cold that Ryan had to cover up his face to survive. But the cold didn't keep us from enjoying the outdoors as well. Minnesota has such a variety of winter activities to offer. There are more than 11,800 lakes, so it's quite common to live near one. And of course, in summer, people will go out jet skiing or tubing on the lakes. But even in winter, when the lakes are frozen over, people go out there to go ice fishing. And in fact, we saw ice fishing huts scattered across almost every lake that we passed. And this is a really new concept for me. I didn't know much about ice fishing. Luckily, one evening, we drove the car onto the ice to hang out in my brother-in-law Justin's ice fishing hut. So it was already dark outside and there was a slight snowstorm going on, but inside the fishing hut, it was really warm and bright. Until the generator shut down because it was buried in snow. So we had to move that and clean it up, but afterwards the light came back on again. In the meantime, this is Justin carving out the fish hole. And then it was time to catch some fish.
Nice.
Yeah,
so
pretty. Another highlight for me was ice skating on a frozen lake. Frankfurt has a really great ice skating rink, but I had always dreamed of skating on a real frozen lake, and that wish finally came true. The surface was a lot bumpier. especially in places where the snow had melted and refrozen. But some people will drive a plough onto the ice to create a smoother surface, just like they do in an ice skating rink. And Justin actually does this too, to create a racing track for his dirt bike. People actually race dirt bikes on the ice, and the wheels have these nails embedded into them for a better grip on the surface. Now this is me learning to ride a dirt bike on the ice for the first time, and I stalled the engine about 10 times at least, which was a bit embarrassing, but to my defense, you release the clutch with your hand, which feels very different to when you release the clutch with your foot in a car. Anyway, I figured it out eventually, and very soon Ryan and I were both trying out the homemade runway at a pretty slow speed, but I still felt very cool. Later on, I even found this historic picture of an ice race from between 1890 and 1900 that I just had to share with you. We also visited a spectacular ice castle, complete with hidden passageways where the smaller, younger visitors could seek refuge, as well as multiple slides made of ice and decorated with fancy lights that lay frozen inside the ice. We did feel young enough to try those out. It was so beautiful,
Oh, my butler is freezing.
but also really freezing. Finally, we went cross-country skiing also for the first time. Mum struggled a little bit at the start, but by the end she got the hang of it and was going really strong. And we even spotted a deer just off the path.
So I hope you enjoyed that little mini travel vlog in Minnesota. And coming up now is part 1 of our interview with Zanete Hussein.
Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Zanete Hussein from Zanete Knits. We first featured Zanete in episode 150 as a knitter of the world, and so we're thrilled to have her back with us to dive deeper into her design approach and wealth of technical knowledge. Now, Zanete is probably best known for her striking and elaborate colourwork yoke sweaters, of which I'm wearing one right now, but her skills and aesthetic go far beyond that. In fact, she often combines techniques like lace, cables, and colourwork into a single design that ends up being both complex and harmonious. So she's very talented. And Zanete, thank you very much for joining us on Fruity Knitting.
Oh my goodness, so awesome to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here. Now, as a child, you grew up in Latvia, but you went on to live in Canada, Sweden, France, and eventually the UK, where you are now. So as a quick introduction for the audience, could you tell us how each country impacted your aesthetic or maybe your technical skills?
Sure, yeah. So growing up in Latvia, we knit because we needed the things that we made. It was out of necessity. So it was a skill that was passed down from generation to generation and also taught at school as part of the home economics class, along with sewing, crocheting, embroidery, cooking, pickling, and everything. So my mom taught me, my grandma and my mom taught me the combination style knitting, and we knit everything mimicking sewing. So we knit everything bottom up in pieces with a set-in sleeve and seaming. And there were no knitting patterns, so you had some wool, and you figured out how many stitches to cast on from a gauge swatch, and that gave me a solid foundation, an understanding on how to make garment from scratch without pattern. It's probably something that not many knitters have these days. And then when I was 17, I moved to Canada to study in one of the United World Colleges, and it was a surreal experience because I was the only Latvian on campus along with 200 students from 80 different countries. So I felt really lonely and misunderstood, and then knitting was my comfort. So it was an emotional kind of need for me to knit. I used my student aid money to buy acrylic yarn from Walmart, and I was knitting everything from sweaters to once I made a hideous maxi length lace coat that I never wore in the end. But it was a lot of knitting, so it was very comforting for me. What surprised me there was that not many students knew how to knit, and those that did, they were making basic garter stitch scarves and beanies with the throwing method and using chunky wools. I didn't know that other methods existed then, and I also realized that knitting wasn't as universal as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, I was on exchange year in Sweden at my uni, and there was a lot of studying to do, but I was impressing my flatmates with my knitting again. And then I realized that it's something super valuable and something that I should cherish, but I was still in my knitting bubble, not meeting any other knitters. And then I moved to France. Life brought me to the southern France, and that completely changed my sense of style. I ended up in a very style-savvy friend group. My boyfriend was picking out clothes for me.
Oh, wow.
At first I was like, no, who are you to tell me what to wear? But eventually I sort of embraced the help because I was sticking out like a sore thumb. So their very neutral and minimal aesthetic was a huge change for me. I remember that once I had bought a bright red top and I was going to wear it to our night out, and he sort of looked at me and said, only women who earn money with their bodies wear red. And I thought, wow, okay.
Oh my goodness.
That stuck with me to this day. I have nothing. I mean, this is probably the brightest thing I have ever made. But yeah, there's nothing red in my wardrobe.
What a shame. I love red.
Well, it's okay on nails and on lips,
Yeah.
apparently, but not on a full on garment. So yeah, but that's the French. Now we're in UK. Anything goes. But I started applying the same sort of less is more, nothing flashy to also my knitwear. And I was still knitting cables, but I really subscribed to the understated styles, and then I paid a lot more attention to colors and not being too bright and too flashy. So that stuck with me. And then fast forward about 7 years ago, I was back in the UK and went on maternity leave with my second child. I had a little bit more time on my hands, and Instagram was booming then. And I started posting my little sweaters I was making for my baby to be on Instagram, and people were asking me for patterns.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are patterns? I didn't know it was a thing. But what I did realize that I'm not the dinosaur. There are other knitters out there. So yeah, it was. I got curious to see what they were doing. I started following all the knitting hashtags and all the YouTube videos, and finally discovered other methods to bind off and cast on and other constructions. So yeah, UK was the place where everything shifted, and I got connected to the global community and started writing things down.
Yeah, and I suppose you became a bit more colourful again. I think in the UK a lot more is acceptable.
Yes.
And they're happier to experiment.
Especially since I rediscovered color work, you kind of have to be a bit more colourful. Yeah.
Well, I think another reason you moved back to the UK was because of your job, right? Because your background is in IT and project management. So I'm thinking that must have also helped later on when you became a designer. So why don't you tell us how those IT and project management skills help you design knitwear, organise your creative workflow, and also maintain deadlines, of which I'm sure you have many. And I'm also wondering, in recent years, AI has become a really big thing. So do you use AI in your work?
Oh yeah, what a great question. You know, I used to be a computer programmer, and then I moved back to UK to be a manager level. And I never thought that those things would be any way related to knitting pattern design, but actually the skills that I carried over were really, really making a huge change. So firstly, programming is almost like pattern writing. You tell the computer step-by-step instructions on what you want it to do. Mm-hmm. And knitting patterns are the same, except instead of writing code, we get to speak plain English. And second, grading patterns requires mathematical thinking, making patterns in multiple sizes. And because I love spreadsheets, that comes very naturally to me. And I even think it's the most fun part of the whole process when other designers find it tricky and a struggle. But the biggest impact is I figured out that I can treat all my pattern releases or patterns as software projects because they go through the same cycles, so to speak, the same life cycle stages. There's research and requirements, there's design, implementation, testing, and finally launch. And I have listed out all the tasks that are in each of these stages, and I've written out detailed SOPs, that's standard operating procedure, so that I can carry out the same, maintain the consistency across all the patterns and delegate work where other people can help me, so I don't have to do everything on my own. Managing everybody involved in the process is just like stakeholder management in a software development project. Instead of the big boss and my cross-functional team, I get yarn partners, photographers, technical editors, test knitters, and the amazing knitters in the end. So it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, so you've really developed a pipeline for creating knitting patterns. And how many knitting patterns are you working on at one time? And how long does it take to develop one knitting pattern?
Yeah, it's anywhere from 4 to 7 months, depending on complexity. As soon as a yarn partner will reach out for potential collaboration, this whole process kicks off. We send them guidelines that explain how we do things. We agree on the timeline and add it in the pipeline, like you said. And then we set the milestone dates and communicate to everybody, so that way there's no surprises, no missed tasks, and no stress. And it's like a well-oiled machine. And it probably the thing that lets me release about 2 patterns a month for the last year and a half or so. It's a pretty well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
And then your question about the AI. I do use AI. I guess being tech savvy does help make do things a bit quicker. I rely a lot on the automation tools, but AI has helped me in address some personal challenges. For example, I'm not a native English speaker and I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I'm not well read. And writing anything prosaic that isn't just logical bullets is an agony. And I used to it was painful to write a pattern introduction. I'd spend hours to make it sound natural. Now I just give it AI a couple of bullet points and out comes this eloquent phrase. And it's so much better in minutes than my alphabet soup. So yeah, I use AI for that a lot. I can write newsletters, social posts with a lot more confidence. I mean, the input is still original and mine. It's just
rewording it to make it easier for other people to understand. I use it sometimes as well. If I'm trying to, for example, give instructions on a technique or whatever, and I just make the most complicated sentence out of it, and then you put it into ChatGPT, and it just helps you order it more clearly and cohesively so other people understand what you're trying to say. Yeah. So I completely understand that.
When there's an email that makes you angry and you write a response and you sort of say, okay, please make it more empathetic.
Yeah. So
and then it helps. Yeah.
Basically, ChatGPT is making all of us nicer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure sorry, do you have anything else to say?
I was going to say that a big game changer has been an ability to support knitters that don't speak English. I can now understand their questions and provide support, which in return they can translate with AI, and it's been amazing in breaking this barrier. So, but yeah, I don't use AI for any of my design ideas. I have so much ideas. I don't think I'll ever run out or need AI's help for that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm sure there's a lot of designers out there who would love some tips from you on how to become more efficient, because a lot of them, come from the design area but don't necessarily have the structure in place yet. All right, so I'm sure our viewers really want to see some of your designs. Why don't you start off by telling us what some of your favourite construction methods are and why they work so well for you?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm currently obsessed with three constructions in particular. My biggest passion is for something called the European shoulder. Also heard it referred to as Japanese shoulder construction or fully fashioned shoulder. And that's where the shoulder seam is slightly towards the back and a little bit sloped. And that in combination with a set-in sleeve that is worked seamlessly from the top down, and the cap is shaped with short rows. So that's my favorite construction right now because it just gives a very tailored look and a nice fit. And it's pretty simple to start with. We cast on the stitches here just for the back neck, and then we rapidly increase along the edges here to the full width of the back and work down to the underarm, shaping armholes or whatever. And after that, we pick up along where we increased here the fronts and knit that straight to where we need to either join them or we don't if we're making a cardigan. So that part is great because the fact that this is sloped, it takes care of the shoulder slope. And provides a great fit without us having to do any short rows. And also the front is always longer here than the back because the front contributes towards the back a little bit. And by playing with this length, you can also create the neck scoop so that the neck isn't digging into your the back of your head. So those two things are really great points, and it makes it easier to design. Actually, the shapes are very basic, trapezoid and two rectangles. But where the tricks start is the set-in sleeve shaping with short rows. So here we are dealing not only with short rows that we work back and forth to shape the cap, but also the fact that the armhole circumference is bigger than our upper arm circumference. That requires us to incorporate decreases along the way. And if that sort of instruction is done over anything but stockinette, well, it isn't necessarily hard to knit. It's certainly very tricky to explain if this isn't stockinette. So yes, I've started this construction with some basic stockinette patterns like this arpeggio top, and then slowly incorporate them into other patterns. Like this tempo sweater is a 1x3 twisted rib, and here you can see how it's the same sort of sleeve as. And then the next time I tried it on a garter stitch, this is my Chanel inspired blazer where you can see the same construction with short row shaped caps. And then if I want to apply this construction on anything that isn't stockinette, for example, cables or color work, I will be sure that I don't put anything here in the sleeve cap. Otherwise it gets really weirdy to explain what to do. But then I'm sort of not happy that I'm restricted to always having stockinette here. So I came up with another workaround that does let me add, have the European shoulder and the set-in sleeve kind of look. But also allows me to have textured patterns here in the sleeve cap. And this one is similar. We again start with the back neck and work to the full width of the back with increases, but that's where we stop. And we immediately pick up the fronts to work them separately to also the counterpoint on the other side. And then we pick up the stitches for the sleeve along here and work everything in one piece. And the cap is then shaped using increases. So it feels like you're working on a kind of a raglan sweater because you're working on the fronts, the back, and the sleeves at the same time. Except the increases are all sporadic and unpredictable. So for example, here you see the body isn't increased all the way to where we need to shape the armholes, whereas the sleeves are increasing in width all the way to where I've reached my stitch count that I don't need, and I stop increasing there.
And I like the way you always have a little border here in stocking stitch on all of the designs that you showed.
that's technically helpful because it's a clear border to where the front and sleeve start.
Yeah.
But it also compositionally provides like a frame for the garment. And I love that currently.
Yeah. Keeps it from being too busy. Although this is all the same pattern. So
Yeah. So this has allowed me to create an all over lace pattern that's got the pattern here in the sleeve cap, and I'm experimenting in my current work in progress. So my current work in progress is for my husband, is also the same construction. We also picked up the stitches for the sleeve and worked it in one piece. And here instead of lace, I'm using a lot of slip stitch and tuck stitch pattern to create the texture. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. So grading this type of pattern is definitely a brain workout, but it's just so much more easier afterwards to explain what to do in each section than it would be with short rows and decreases.
And I get a feeling you look for brain workouts in your designs.
I look for brain workouts, yes. I love the brain workouts. And you already mentioned that in the introduction, but I'm probably best known for my round yoke colorwork sweaters. And over the few years that I've done these, I've through trial and error, I've figured out a formula that lets me design a pattern that will fit well across all the sizes. The challenge there was the fact that the neck circumference grows a lot slower than the chest circumference, so there will be a lot smaller difference between the neck circumference than the chest circumference across the multiple sizes. So if you want to use the same yoke repeat, the same chart repeat for all the sizes, then I have figured out that you have to do most of the increases before you even begin following the color work. And that might mean that for the larger sizes, there will be a little bit more of the plain stuff here to allow the increases to spread evenly, but that's then that then ensures a greater fit and not a huge neckline for the larger sizes.
Yeah.
So I've done that for most of my Latvian inspired color works and for all of my floral collections that have cardigans and sweaters as well. But when I first started colorwork yoke designs, I didn't know this yet, and to manage the increased cadence, I ended up doing a chart per size. So, for example, this is the Pagan Sky. It's my first round colorwork yoke design. And there's actually 6 patterns in one, because for the 6 sizes, there's a different chart for each size that lets you manually add where you place those increases, and then you have a lot more control how to distribute them across the different sizes. And I was still quite naive and did the same for this 1001 Suns, which is actually 8 patterns in one because there's 8 charts. But yeah, that does make the patterns really long and risk of making mistakes. So yeah, recently I've just stuck to having the increases mostly done before we start the color work. But then that kind of means that you have a little bit less space here in the yoke to play with the color work. So I've my tradition, and now I don't even know how to go back, is to continue the color work past sleeve separation, and that's pretty much in all of my yoke designs. But then that presents a challenge. How do you ensure that the pattern continues all around? And I don't want the pattern repeat width to dictate the size increments. So what I've done is I've introduced a fake seam here at the sides.
That's very clever.
That mimics kind of what happens if you were cutting up printed fabric and sewn it. And then that means the front and the back can move independently, and I have full control over how wide I can make it. And then that also has the side effect of being really easy to add shaping. So I've found that I like my yoke sweaters quite free around here without restricting too much. And then if I raise my arms, they don't stay up there. But then it's quite flattering if you add some waist shaping here at the sides. And then with this fake seam, it's very easy to do that. You just add the decreases near the fake seam. And then the last side effect is super easy to block because you can immediately find the sides when you lay it flat.
That's true.
Done.
Yeah. So does that mean for this pattern, for example, you only have one chart?
Yes,
and then you basically cut away smaller the size skirts. That's so cool. Yeah, good idea.
And the third construction is socks. I never used to love knitting socks because we had a cuff down socks. But then on the Instagram somewhere, I saw an all over colorwork sock with a sole gusset and a heel flap. And I thought that's the most beautiful sock I've ever seen. And that got me into starting designing socks and knitting socks. So this is a toe-up construction. And I love it for its elegant look as well as the practicality. I feel that if a sock doesn't have a gusset, then it's never going to have a good fit because the circumference around here is much bigger than around our foot. So we do need that extra fabric. And having it at the sole instead of at the sides is not only cooler look, but also easier to design because you then have to just 2 sections to describe, just the top of the foot and then the bottom of the foot instead of the fragmented side gussets. And then I also like to add a little heel shaping here to round the heel because at least my heel isn't like a Minecraft square. So this prevents little pockets from forming here. And then a heel flap. Well, here I experimented with honeycomb brioche. It's not very practical of me.
It's very
because
pretty,
it's
though.
very squishy. So these are Sunday socks. You just put them on Sundays. But yeah, I just love it. And then that also means you can make the leg as long as you want. Yeah. Not only for style reasons, but also for yarn management. For example, here in these Aussikless sock, I only had 1 mini skein of this contrast color, so I could decide how long I make them at the very last minute. And so now I have very cute ankle socks instead of a disaster if I had knit them cuffed down and realized mid-foot I won't have enough yarn for both. So yeah, now I've that.
And what is this heel called?
That is, I don't know.
We'll Google it later.
It's I know it's a sole gusset and that's a heel flap.
Yeah.
But I to this day I have not found the name for this construction. My inspiration sources didn't have a name, and I've just sort of mimicked what I've seen. So,
well, I bet you one of our viewers is going to leave a comment below the video.
Okay,
and
yes.
Find out. Yeah,
I
love how easy it makes to create a beautiful color work that looks complicated but just fits in perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about these socks?
And then I was just going to say that I like to iterate over this construction and make it more and more perfect with every design. So I found that if I add more stitches in the leg than in the foot, when it comes to stranded color work, then we can have a snug fit around the foot without the trouble of getting your heel through because of the restricted stretch of stranded color work. So that's one little tip that solves the problem. And here is another one of my funky experiments. I thought that I could make a sock with a squishy sole that has the slip stitch pattern throughout the whole foot. But then I realized when I got here that the regular increases that I'm doing here on the sides for the gusset aren't going to work because this is a 2-stitch repeat. So how do you manage that? There will be 2 slipped stitches in a row, and I didn't like that. So adding them in the center solves that problem, but also creates a really funky look. And then, the short rows are even. Yeah, it's an experiment and a challenge and the cool sock in one.
Yeah. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed part 1 of our interview with Zanete. I think she's fantastic. Before we continue, we want to say a very big thank you to those of you who support the show financially as Fruity Knitting patrons, because without you, this show couldn't exist. Mum and I work really hard to bring you this program. We organise, prepare and film all the different segments to make it as varied and educational as we can. And it's our aim that you always learn something new and be inspired by the creativity and the knowledge of other knitters and designers out there in the world. And sometimes we also like to present some fibre arts that you may not be familiar with, such as rug hooking or even tatting, which I did a few months back for my wedding dress. So if you enjoy this program, then please support the show by making a small monthly donation. Every support counts and makes a difference for us. And it's very easy to sign up. Just go to patreon.com/fruityknitting to become a Hebridean, Merino or Shetland patron. Thank you very much for your support, and the link is in the description box below.
Yes, thank you very much. So we're happy to announce that Zanete is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount on all of her self-published designs, and her collection includes sweaters, cardigans, shawls, socks and summer tops. Full details of the discount is available on fruityknitting.com, our Patreon page, and also in the description box below. So many thanks to Zanete for this generous offer. And recently we had a live online event with our Shetland patrons, and our guest was Claudia Finlay, and she's the organiser of the Munich Knits Yarn Festival, which we featured in episode 160. So Claudia also has an online shop, and she's kindly offering Fruity Knitting patrons a discount of her Lana Mania yarns. So the details for this discount is also on our Patreon site and in the description box below. So thank you very much to Claudia. So when you're designing a yarn, you start with test spins so you can try out different options. For example, how many plies you want, how high the twist should be, and of course all the different colours. We have now made a final decision on our yarns. It's going to be a sport weight with 4 plies with a slightly higher twist, but then the yarn gets sent to a finisher and it'll be steamed there, and that will make the yarns bloom a little bit more but also set the fibres. But along the way, we experimented a little bit more with our dark green yarn, which we're calling Billabong. And with this one, we also tried out a 3-ply with a looser twist. And we've decided against that, but it does mean that we have some leftover yarn hanging around the house from this test spin, which I don't like. I don't like yarn hanging around the house. So this yarn will actually knit up to the same gauge as our final yarn will, but it'll just have a slightly different handle. And I'm using this test spin yarn to knit a beautiful cable lace design by Rachel Isley. And she's the designer behind Unwind Knitwear, and we featured her as a knitter of the world in episode 157. So this is the low tide sweater. It features a beautiful eyelet lace and cable pattern running down the front and the back with a smaller version of the motif down the sleeves. So the design represents ripples of sand, tiny rivulets of water, and scattered pebbles and shells left on the beach as the tide goes out. That's the lovely evocative image that Rachel paints with her description. So the garment is worked top down, mostly in the round, and it has a saddle shoulder and a compound raglan arm scathe. So this is what I've done so far. You want to hold it for me? I've knitted down to the bottom of the arm scathe where the sleeves will separate from the body. This is the first design of Rachel's that I've actually knit, and I can highly recommend it. What I noticed is when we featured her as a knitter of the world, she was really meticulous and organised, and she's also a professional teacher. So I think all of that contributes to her patterns being very clear and systematic. And she does YouTube tutorials for the tricky bits in her sweaters, which is a real time saver. For instance, if you want to hold it, and we'll just stretch it out here, the very start of this sweater is a little bit tricky, or it's unusual, and just watching her tutorial made it way easier and to follow the pattern and understand what's going on. So it's an interesting construction. You start off with the neckband in the circle, and then you start with this saddle shoulder on the right. So you're knitting that back and forward, just this long strip, knitting and purling, and then you'll end up to this side and of the saddle shoulder, and you'll pick up stitches along the edge of that, and then you've already got stitches down here, so you knit across the front neck, and then you start working the saddle shoulder on the left shoulder, and that's again a strip going back and forward, knitting and purling. And then when you come to the final width, you're on this side here, and you're going to pick up stitches along the back edge of the saddle shoulder, knit across the back neck. You're almost in the round. You still have stitches to pick up along this edge, so you do that, and then you get here and you've nearly completed a round. So you knit around here again until you're at the front of the left saddle shoulder strip, and you pick up stitches there. Then you are completely in the round, and from then on you are just knitting in the round, except you can imagine that in these little corners you've got a triangle, 2 here on the front and 2 in the same positions at the back, which need to be filled in a little bit. So they're filled in as you come to each one. You fill them in with short rows, knit around, fill the next one in with short rows, and then finally you kind of equal in the round, and then you're knitting straight down, and at the same time you're going to shape the compound raglan sleeves, which essentially just means that you increase at a slower rate to start off with, and then at a faster rate when you get down to the underarm. That's the tricky bit, but her video really makes that pretty easy once you watch it. So now it's just plain sailing straight down to the bottom. And there is stocking stitch on either side, so I will probably add some waist shaping, which I love.
Yeah.
And I'm really loving it.
Yeah, it's very pretty, and I also love the colour for it.
You're thinking of doing the same design, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
So the recommended gauge for this design is 22 stitches and 32 rows in stocking stitch. And our yarn usually works best, I think, at 23 or 23.5 stitches per 10 centimetres. And to get that gauge, I normally use a needle size of 3.75 millimetres. But this time on this design, I decided to go up to size 4 millimetre just to get a slightly looser fabric so I could match the gauge. And I actually think it suits the yarn really well, especially since the eyelet cable pattern can handle a slightly looser gauge. So that's my latest project. And now coming up very soon is part 2 of our interview with Zanete. And as I mentioned in the introduction, we're really happy to offer a second retreat with Zanete. And that's going to be later this year in October. It's going to be 6 days and 5 nights. And it'll take place from the 11th to the 16th of October. And that's a really great time to be in the Austrian Alps because all of the autumn colours are just coming out in full bloom and the mountains look really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
So we're very excited about Zanete's workshops. Zanete is, of course, known for her stunning, intricate colourwork designs, so her workshops will naturally focus on stranded colour work, sharing her expert tips on tension, float management, along with a deep dive into the ladderback jacquard method and Japanese short rows. Zanete's also known for her beautifully tailored, perfectly fitting garments, so finishing techniques will also be another key focus with her workshops. And as I mentioned, she'll be designing a special retreat sweater with our yarns. Super, super exciting. And the workshop, well, the seminar room where we'll be doing our workshops in is really amazing. It's light and spacious with very modern facilities. So we'll be staying at the luxurious Riesa Spa Resort, and past participants have really been thrilled with this location. So we're very confident in the high quality food and the facilities that they offer. And the resort is in the charming village of Perdersau, which lies by a small crystal blue lake called Aachensee, and it's surrounded by the Tyrolean mountains. So the views are really, really amazing, and just a 10-minute walk away is a cable car that takes you to the top of the mountain for breathtaking views of the lake. And there's a lot of scenic walking trails around the lake and also up the mountains. The spa itself has multiple pools and saunas, including morning yoga and meditation sessions, and our guests will have plenty of relaxation and knitting time, as well as time to enjoy the surrounding nature. Actually, as you're sitting in the spa, you have really stunning views of the mountains surrounding you. It's totally gorgeous. And of course, your non-knitting partners are very, very welcome to join us. There's lots of extra outdoor hiking and biking and sightseeing activities for them to do while we're busy knitting in the workshops. So as usual, we like to open up registrations for our patrons first as a very big thank you for their support, faithful support over the years. So patrons will be able to register for this retreat on Friday, the 30th of January, and then everybody else will be able to register on Saturday, the 31st of January.
Yeah, and the exact times when we open up for registration are visible on our website, artisan-retreats.com, under bookings and pricing.
So coming up next is part 2 of our interview with Zanete. Enjoy it. And we are very grateful that you spent time with us again. And we will see you very soon in February.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Well, you are somebody who likes to experiment with lots of different knitting techniques, as we've already seen on your designs. But what knitting techniques do you feel most confident in as a designer? And maybe you could demonstrate how you take advantage of those techniques and really make them work for you, using some of your designs as an example.
So I used to think that cables was my superpower. I would do nothing but cables, and that's the most comfortable I feel in knitting. And I'm always fascinated with what you can create with cables. But the problem is when you try and design something with cables, if you want to go anywhere past the usual rectangular shapes and rectangular things, and you want it to fit like nicely and tailored, then cables are problematic because you need a chart for anywhere you want to do some shaping, because you need to explain what to do with if there's not enough stitches to make a cross or if there's too many. So if we grade a pattern on 9 sizes, that ends up being so many little difficult charts that it becomes too complicated to follow a pattern. So
Yeah.
I have not been designing that many cable sweaters, but it is my most favorite technique for knitting. In terms of lace, I am still discovering lace. I am a lot more excited to do more of lace work. I used to think it's super old-fashioned, but I think now with the rise of crocheting and open knitworks, it's coming back into fashion. So, and I find myself very drawn to some of these lace patterns. But the challenge there is you cannot visualize the chart when you see it, because the stitch columns go in all sorts of different directions and they all of a sudden abruptly end, etc. So it's a completely different visualization challenge, and I'm hoping to be confident with lace, but it's my current sort of obsession.
Oh, I love this design. Just to point it out, the stitches are going diagonally. But you're still knitting it, what is it, top down?
Yeah, it's top down. It's just cables and lace, actually.
Yeah. Looks a little bit like a cross.
Yeah, that's done with a cable cross.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's one of the laciest works I've had. And funnily enough, the technique that I am most confident designing with is color work, even though it's the technique that I rediscovered the latest. Until 2020, I didn't do any color work. I had a very traumatic experience at school and I hated making the Latvian mittens. So I stayed away from it for most of my life. But now I've found all these game-changing techniques, such as the ladder back jacquard that lets you catch floats so invisibly that long floats are no longer a problem. See,
That's incredibly neat.
So you just get this extra stitch here that's like scaffolding at the back, and you don't see any of that at the front. It's just smooth color work. So that just gives me so much versatility. There's sky's the limit with color work, and I'm looking forward to integrating a lot more of color work in my more European shoulder tailored versions.
Yeah.
And in terms of other techniques that that are in my toolbox and I always go to is I use short rows everywhere. I use them here to raise the back of the neck in my top-down sweaters. I use them to shape the sleeve caps. I even use them to do sort of I don't have it here, but a sloped neckband and then sock heels. So that's a very, very important technique if you want to do patterns top down and seamless where you don't have the seaming step. And my favorite are Japanese short rows because they're the most invisible and versatile in my opinion. And increases as well. There's lots of different increase methods, but I have discovered that my favorite is the lifted increase. Here you can see I've knitted in this direction, and this is done with lifted increases, and they're just the most neatest, and there's a clear left and right and clear purl and knit increases, very structured. But what I have discovered that if you use the traditional lifted increase, so how the lifted increase works is that you use an existing stitch that has already been worked, you just reuse it again. And that means you don't disturb any of the surrounding stitches, and the fabric is not other bits of the fabric are not involved, which is why it looks so undisturbed and neat. But with the traditional one, you just knit into it again, and sometimes it stretches it out a little bit. And if you're working with color work, for example, I would high contrasting colors, the other color can peep through and create like little dots that you might not want. So my workaround is to use the twisted lifted increase, where you knit into it so that the original stitch gets twisted and
through the back or
through the back loop. Yeah, well, it depends on which direction the increase is. Sometimes it's through the front loop. But so that the original stitch gets twisted, and that conceals any holes and
bumps your ankle. Just a very quick question. How do you use short rows here around the neckline?
So this is the neckband where I'm using short rows to shape the neckband. You can see that it's much higher here than here, and that's achieved with short rows. You can even see how they kind of look a bit weird here. But yeah, so you can get like a very sloped, nice shape for the
it's actually
neckband.
very simple. And then did you decrease again to fold the neckline over in the end?
Actually, you worked all around, then you stop here, then you stop here, then you stop here, then you stop here, then you stop here. And when you work the next time, you just kind of go back step by step. And that makes sure that here is the shortest and here is the longest, and they are all just gradually changing height. So that's great. That's the answer to that question.
Okay.
But I struggle to sort of answer this question because it's my design philosophy to try and always include something in the pattern that is completely out of my comfort zone. So there's always that little something that I'm not comfortable with, and then because I value that feeling you get once you have accomplished it and you look back and said, I did that. And that's why a lot of knitters love working from my patterns, because they've said, even after 40 years of knitting, I always learn something new. So it could be a construction detail, like I was already talking about how we use the textured pattern on a set-in sleeve that's seamless, or it could be a decorative bind-off that's not very popular. And there's always some little detail that I will include in the pattern to make it more fun.
And that's a good attitude to have, because I think that's what keeps our brains young, is constantly doing something that we're not quite comfortable with. Challenging ourselves.
I would have burnt out ages ago if I had to do the same color work round yoke sweaters over and over again. And this just keeps me fueled and motivated to continue.
Well, we've got another beautiful design in front of us, the regalia sweater, and this one is a great example of how Zanete combines lots of different techniques together into one design, and I'm truly impressed by it. So could you just explain how you came up with this complex pattern and yet made it look so simple and elegant, and also what were some of the challenges that you faced and how did you solve them in the end?
Yeah, designing is so much fun, actually. So I had a vague idea of what I wanted it to be. I wanted this to be a round yoke sweater that transitions from a dark top into all white here, as you see. And I also wanted to deliberately purposefully mixed two different techniques, so color work and something. I had seen in my inspiration sources some color work with cables, but because of the stitch gauge difference, I wasn't going to go there yet. So lace was a next good candidate, and so because of that transition, by process of elimination, the color work then gets reserved for the transition section, and that means we have to start with lace. But I had another limitation, and all these limitations and restrictions kind of get your creative juices flowing. I only had one skein of this darker yarn, and I didn't think that would be enough for the increase section here as well as the neckband. So I had to do 2 transitions. And my kind of the dream was to create a fringe-like transition. So that in color work, that translates into these vertical stripes. And so I had to figure out how to make it coherent also in the other transition. And I don't think I've said this, but when I was a kid, I was a classically trained pianist, and I was doing that for 12, 13 years. At one point, it was going to be my career. But I also had composition lessons as a kid at school. And there we were taught that if you want cohesion, then you'll introduce a melodic theme, and then you will repeat it on some sort of variation, either a different pitch or a different instrument and things like that. So, or different tempo. And here I have tried to mimic the same thinking, the same concepts. I've introduced these fringes here that I knew they were the basis of this design, and then I'm echoing them here as well. Into this ribbing, and that ribbing here and there and also somewhere else is like the same theme except using a different instrument. So that's my design kind of background as far as I go. The rest of me is, I consider myself an architect. So the next step was to figure out which lace pattern and how to do it. So I borrowed a pattern repeat from Hitomi Shida's stitch library, and I added some increases to make it fit a round yoke and to make it a little bit of my own. But as I was swatching it, I realized that it's going to be quite flat in comparison to the quite thick color work that follows. So next iteration was to add some texture and in form of bubbles. And again, here we introduce the bubbles, then we repeat them. Then there's a variation of bubbles going on. Well, this was already, I think, in the pattern, but I kind of echoed them later. And another interesting knot stitch here and echoed here where we actually have color work at the same time going on.
Yeah. Is this a couching stitch? So you did it while knitting, or?
Yes, you do it while knitting. Okay. Just I transferred the stitches onto another needle and just wrapped the yarn around.
Okay. Yeah.
And then worked over them. So and that solved the flatness, and it also looked quite impressive. I was happy with that. But then came the fringe time, and if I kept all the fringes straight like here and cut them off at the same length, that looked really boring. So I added some cables. These are actually 3-stitch cables in color work, and cut them off at different times to have some movement. So it took 4 or 5 attempts to get to a pattern repeat that I was happy with, and I could build the rest of the sweater on, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the recommended yarn for this is actually a natural color palette, isn't it? Which I think is perfectly suited to this pretty busy pattern.
Yeah.
But it makes it sort of more, dezent is the German word, so not full in your face, but just flows really lovely.
Yeah, it's one of those rare patterns, the color work patterns, where subtle contrast works just as well as high contrast, depending on what you want to achieve, because the emphasis isn't on the pattern here. It's more on the stitch definition of the yarn to make sure that it all shows up.
Well, apart from knitting and designing, you also maintain a very active presence on social media, and you work closely with your test knitters. So how do you approach that side of your work?
Test knitters. They are gold, and they have helped me immensely because I wasn't familiar with patterns. I didn't work from patterns. So everything in my patterns is based on test knitter recommendations. And now I'm confident that what I'm putting out there is quality product. So I prioritize taking care of them. To be honest, my teammate does most of the work. She's very good at it. But what we do is we run the tests like a mini knit along that is 8 to 9 weeks long, and we have a dedicated Slack channel per project where people can come together, show their yarns, ask questions. They have a direct channel to me as well, and I answer any questions they have about the test, and I really appreciate their feedback. Even though my tech editor catches all the mistakes, all the maths mistakes, they are really great at showing me where I could improve, clarify things. And the feedback has been that they feel supported, they enjoy being part of the community and being inspired. And they, again, say they learn a lot with every test, and they keep coming back, which is amazing. Yeah. And I've also started, through that interaction, I realized that things that I've learned aren't common knowledge. So that's brought me to teaching a lot more. I'm doing a lot more workshops in festivals and yarn shops here in the UK. Also working on recording courses, to speak, on things like the ladder back jacquard technique or the Japanese short rows, because they have been such game changers for me. I want to share it. And also lately I have released patterns that are accompanied with these full length courses that take you step by step, because these days video is key. People prefer to watch a quick video than read a long text. So the community has just been fantastic. I think the most fun we had at the start of this year when we did a mystery yoke along. You are wearing the last year's version. This
Do you yoke?
With the EWE. This year we made this sweater, and it was released in 7 clues. No one had any idea of the final design, and it mixes mosaic and stranded color work. And it also came with, and it still has, the full pattern tutorial step by step on everything how to do. So the participation was just off the charts. I did not expect there to be so many people, and they were creating the most inspiring color combinations. And what I forgot to mention in my test knits, I actually encourage people to make little modifications, because I want to see how the pattern will be used in real life, in conditions, so to speak. And then I am always inspired by what people choose to do. And the mystery yoke along was delivered on that. People were adding their own patterns or modifying so that they doesn't feel like a t-shirt, some said, or they didn't want to do the mosaic and they'd just be like knitting that. And when it came to the neckband, because we had that last, I have many reasons for that, but there was so many variations. People were buying other patterns of mine just so they could apply the neckband from the other pattern. So I really am inspired by all the creativity. And I do post on social media every day, because if you want to earn a living doing what you love, you kind of have to convince everybody that your work is worth their time and effort and money. And so that means dancing in front of the crowds until you meet the people that vibe with you, join your community. Means every day I'm on the Instagrams. I love it. And the reactions have been for most part very encouraging and supportive, and that's what really propels this for me to continue this
journey. I just wanted to take a moment to show some more of Zanete's designs, especially the summer ones, because I'm still looking for a summer top to wear, and I really like this one. It's got a gorgeous lace pattern. I'm not sure if I'll do the little glitter what are they called? Glittery palettes, because
unless you have a thick skin, don't. 'Cause they're a bit itchy.
Even though they look so pretty. Yeah. And then you've also got this one here, which is very new, isn't it?
Yes, it currently is in testing, but yeah, it will come up this summer.
Do you have a name for it?
It's called the Yasmin top, and you use finger cords here. That's my little detail.
That's super cute. So lots of new techniques to learn there. Well, Zanete, it's been really so fun to have you on the show. You have heaps to share. I think we could have filmed a 4-hour interview and it would have stayed interesting, but alas, the time has to be cut at some point. So thank you very much for coming here down to London and joining us on Fruity Knitting.
Thank you.
Let's say goodbye to the audience. Bye.